Ex-cult members of Reddit, what's your story? How did you end up in a cult? How did you escape? My parents were born into it. They had 6 kids, of which I'm the eldest. I realized over time that the place was toxic, pedophilia, especially in the leadership, and that the things we did weren't normal and we couldn't live properly within the cult. I wanted to leave, but I couldn't just abandon my family. While we were living in Europe, my parents had to consider a new place to live after our visas expired. We're all American but lived in Europe most of our lives. I was around 20 and I told them I was moving to the US because I wanted to go to college. They decided to come with me because they needed my help, and together we worked to distance ourselves from that previous life. Not me, but my father was part of the love family that Charles Manson led. He lived in Death Valley with them for 2 years from ages 15-17. He was a runaway and went by the name Coyote back then. The story I was told is that he finally got out by being physically kidnapped by some friends. He did not want to leave. It must have been some badass friends to know he was in a show to kidnap and save him. Hope he is still close with them. Edit. I was born into it. My mother got my father married within a month of meeting her. Had me 10 months later. And 5 more kids back to back. She was a master manipulator. A leader in her church. And took everything to heart. She and her group were very pro corporal punishment. And I did not have a happy childhood. She broke 3 wooden cutting boards on me. Threw me through a wall. And locked up the food. The wall occurred during one of her meetings where there were 50+ women in her iron barn. They all just laughed about how I had pigged out. It was Christmas. Somebody had given me a donut while I coughed up blood. I got out when she beat my baby brother so bad he went into a coma for a week and she was investigated. I lived with the Moonies for a few years. They do the smother with love thing and sort of guilt trip you a lot. The thing is, I had a lot of fun there. I pretended to believe their thing and stick around until I got tired of it and they started to get suspicious and see me as a bad influence. To stay sane, I'd sometimes buy some weed and leave for a few days. Then I'd come back. I didn't have to work much. Got to go to Korea. Have some road trips. Live in California on the cheap. The only thing I missed out on was sex. They were actually moral people who thought they were doing the right thing. No orgies. No S-Zul drama. It was straight as an arrow. In the end I felt bad for them. Their leadership was corrupt and funneled a lot from their believer base to the upper echelons. I was born into Scientology. I spent hundreds of hours as a kid doing TRs and auditing. My parents spent tens of thousands of dollars on the church. Most of it as donations rather than actual services. I guess I have completely escaped it. I still live with my parents and the type of thinking in Scientology still crawls around my brain. I don't do courses, auditing, or events anymore. Scientology is supposed to save the entire universe. If that's the case, they should be handing out copies of Dianetics like hotcakes. It doesn't make sense to have such high barriers of entry if these materials can literally salvage the universe. I also noticed at school that people could be happy without Scientology and their lives weren't miserable. I was the only one that wasn't happy even though I had the tech. All those axioms about the world just don't work. I was born and raised in a super right-wing sect of evangelicalism. Church of 70-80 people. Everyone homeschooled. Most other churches were viewed as heretical of Satan. Growing up, I was called into the pastor's office and interrogated for reading Shakespeare. Having friends outside of church. Not admitting enough sin during public prayer. Best thing that ever happened to me was being born gay. Parents sent me to Christian college, like Creationist kick you out for drinking alcohol, having straight sex Christian lol. But then I got into a really good law school. Came out to my parents while I was there. Just like that. Almost every relationship I made between birth and 20 years abandoned me. Made leaving super easy and I've never been happier. Now I have an amazing partner. Awesome job. And wonderful friends. Some baggage is still there but I'm so happy to be free. Is Herbalife a cult? I wasn't. But my dad was. My grandma is pretty nuts. Fun for a weekend, but I can't even imagine having her as a parent that you live with every day. Things like chasing her then husband sound with a chainsaw and not remembering it. She goes by Peter because she believes she's the reincarnation of the Apostle Peter. She also got them into several communes and cults. Easily the funniest story from that is when the leader of one of them started claiming to be the second coming, and without skipping a beat she laughs and says, "No, you're not. I knew him." They were immediately kicked out. My wife was in a cult. Her mother still is. Most people refuse to believe it is a cult, but it is. She got out once I started informing her that her church's beliefs were so far beyond what the Bible is about. Not me. My aunt. When I was around 8, she decided to stop celebrating birthdays, holidays, etc. Fast forward 2-3 years, all of a sudden she writes my grandparents the longest letter ever about how her and her husband had packed up the kids and moved to Texas and joined a church called the House of Yahweh in Abilene, Texas. For a lot of years she wasn't able to call or write them. When she finally did start writing them, she always included pamphlets and stuff from the church and basically told them that they weren't living their life the right way if they didn't join her church. I've spoken to her twice in the last 17 years and each time was to let her know that one of her parents died. She has not been back home since she moved away. No visits or anything. It just blew everyone's mind. She always threw all the birthday parties, hosted the holidays, etc. There's some pretty weird stuff on Google about this place. I was born into it and would describe it as a black nationalist hodgepodge of Egyptology, Christianity and aliens. I escaped because the leader was jailed for sex crimes and the compound was raided. I was later taken away from my parents, spent some time in foster care and required to attend public school. It was like entering a new world. Things were so different. I am now an atheist and refuse to believe in anything else without solid evidence. My parents were naive and very vulnerable. They are no longer involved. It's actually nice to read stories about other survivors. I wasn't aware that there were so many people with similar stories. My parents were involved in what I later discovered was called the Quiverful cult. When I was about 10, they started being influenced by the Vision Forum Ministries. The founder of the ministry later dissolved it after a girl brought him up on sexual harassment charges. They started trying to train me to be a housewife and future mother and discouraged anything otherwise. I wanted to go to college and study science, but I was told that I would be out from the protection of my parents and that was not the biblical way. I was homeschooled, wore skirts all the time, and had very long hair. My story is deeper and uglier, but I left home just after my 21st birthday and moved in with my grandmother. I worked a whole summer to be able to make enough to start college and completed a whole year of college with very high grades in spite of high school being hard to complete because my parents cared more about whether farm chores were done than my education because I was a girl. Not me, but a family member. He got involved in a cult that had this strange compound of trailers. He met a girl and they began dating and then he convinced her to join this Christian cult. Another family member, same side, is a lawyer. They were not aware of any of this. The girl's family contacted them about it. This lawyer family member knows deprogrammers. They kidnapped her and deprogrammed her. Not sure about how long it took. She was saved. The male family member eventually left the cult. No one in the family on either side knows about it except me and the lawyer family member. I found out quite young and it really was one of the first times I realized that family is just comprised of people that could be anyone. Like a stranger on the street that you pass and think, what happened to them to be like this? Throw away because this is personal to someone I care about's life. My brother-in-law was a born Jehovah's Witness, though they will tell you they aren't a cult. He went through a lot of beatings, encouraged by the church, not being able to talk to his mom for 3 years while she was exiled, and being denied the right to try and pursue his education because the world was going to end anyway. That is actually the first reason he left. He wanted a life, a good job. He met my sister. They hit it off. and eventually got married. My sister is 21 years older than me, so I have known him my whole life. He is my brother in every sense. They now have 2 beautiful boys. His family comes knocking every now and again, telling my brother that him and my sister and nephews will suffer. His father passed away 4 years ago, and he wasn't even allowed to see him before he passed. I've been involved in a number of cults, both as a leader and a follower. You have more fun as a follower, but you make more money as a leader. I was raised fundamentalist Christian by a severely mentally ill mother who was physically and emotionally abusive. I was coached to be a pastor. I remember the constant criticism, ridicule and brainwashing of biblical literalism. It was religious abuse and has ruined that aspect of spirituality for me. I was so enmeshed as a supply for this narcissist I eventually even went to seminary. Decided it was bull and dropped out. The manipulation has continued well into adulthood. Luckily my wife has helped me see through it, and I have very minimal no contact with most all of my family. The switching between abject neglect to intense intrusive invasion of privacy and gaslighting made the first half of my life a living hell. I consider many churches to be cults. Mine was a personality cult, involving one man's opinion about how a certain religion should be. I woke up sitting in a pew thinking this guy, nor any of these people, know one more thing about the afterlife than I do. I will first explain this to you at one of our meetings. You will be required to leave your cell phone at the front desk when you arrive. I'm not from a cult, but if you're into these stories, check out the podcast called Heaven's Gate. It's really well made. Should have put a serious tag OP. Reposted with a serious tag. Hopefully that one picks up. I was going to write out this big joke about how I've been in one since 2007. Vaguely describe the evil heads of it and the damage they do. Then nonchalantly reveal that the cult is Apple product users. But maybe this is the wrong place to joke. I wouldn't say I was really part of the cult, but I was forced to go to Pentecostal church for about 4 years of my life until I told my mother they were full of crap and refused to go. I remember there being bizarre rules. Women were not allowed to cut their hair. There was some weird going on with pastors. We had 3 over the course of a year. I remember there being a large emphasis on speaking in tongues as well. A bunch of people stood up speaking gibberish pretending to be empowered by the Lord. So a very close relative of mine was in a cult up until the 90s. Back in the 70s he was out in the city with his girlfriend at the time. I don't know exactly how this happened, but he was held at gunpoint while 5 black guys arped his girlfriend in front of him, threatening to kill them both if one of them fought back. A few months later, still messed up about everything that happened, he was hitchhiking and was picked up by some members in this cult who basically offered to save him if he came to live with them. He accepted. He got married while he was in the cult, but after his kid was born they both wanted out and moved to this first city they pointed to on a map. This is such a good topic. I can't talk about it without violating the first and second rules. Is it Fight Club? Did you join Fight Club? I've been involved in a number of cults, both as a leader and a follower. You have more fun as a follower, but you make more money as a leader. The Movimentarians offered me a free fishing weekend. They fed me bowls of gruel, showed me low production value videos of our leader's plan to fly us in a spaceship to Blistonia, where I would experience higher levels of bliss. I collected lima beans that resembled the leader. Turned out to be a fake and I went back to my miserable life. I'm afraid I was in a boring cult. The Seventh-day Adventist Church is considered a cult. But all we did was go to Bible study and eat potlucks full of really good vegetarian dishes. Left the cult after a few years without any trouble whatsoever because everyone was totally normal.